Hello and welcome to this lesson within the series of lessons dealing with data administration for Sage CRM. We're looking now at data management and specifically at sales forecast configuration. It's part of a series of lessons that are all dealing with the whole question around the administration of data within Sage CRM, which encompasses many of the things which mesh together in this particular lesson. So we're going to be looking at sales forecast configuration, but of course that's all about sales figures and price lists and quotes and orders and opportunity management, which have all been topics that we've looked at earlier on. Questions even like user preferences over currency and the use of multi-currency within the system. Everything starts to build into a type of snowball when we're looking at Sage CRM, because it's a very big product that can be simplified or made as rich as the business needs. And in this particular lesson, we're going to cover the knowledge needed to understand how to configure the sales forecast feature. But something that is a very simple topic actually has to be put into the perspective of the whole feature. So although we're going to focus in this lesson on the configuration of sales forecasting, there are other lessons that actually will look specifically at the experience that users have when they create a forecast, and then another lesson that will look at the manager's experience of working with their team's forecast and the process of working with quotas and passing that up in the reporting hierarchy. So really, before I deal with the very simple screen that controls the configuration of sales forecasting, I actually have to show you how it all fits together. And the first place that a user can meet the concept of sales forecasting is actually here within the opportunity list. You can see that I've logged on as a sales user called Brian Little. This particular salesperson is working within one of the territories within North America. Quite why I've managed to get it so he's working with British pounds, I don't know, but I have. That's his preference. That's the way he's set up. And he's reporting in turn to a sales manager called Susan May. And if we look at an area of the screen that I've just highlighted, we can see that the statistics that are shown here show the number of opportunities that are in the current pipeline based on the filters that we've got. We have a forecast value of all of the opportunities in the current part of the pipeline. We have a weighted forecast, which is where we take the forecast value of the value of all of the forecasts multiplied by the certainty, and then the average forecast value is looking at the total forecast value divided by the number of opportunities. So you get immediately a sense of what's the value and likelihood of what's in the pipeline as it is, and that includes the weighted average as well, which is the average value multiplied by the average certainty. It's a bit of a gross sort of simplification of that, but it gives you a ballpark figure of the value of opportunities that are in the current pipeline. But in terms of whether this is a forecast or not, now it's not quite like that. We'll start to explore that idea sort of in a moment. But the figures that I've all got are down to the preferences, the way in which we're just working with GB pounds or dollars or whatever, is down to the fact that the system is multi-currency and the user has expressed a preference underneath the preference screen as to which currency they should be using. Now, if we drill down into an individual opportunity, we can click here, and I've come into this 120 user expense, this system opportunity for the fictional company that there's within the demo system. And I'm going to just turn off coaching to bring all of the fields into the screen. So you can see here, I've just managed to bring a few fields up above the fold. You can see that there are two panels on the opportunity summary screen, which shows information about the value of the opportunity. Now, the first that I highlighted here, where we're highlighting the forecast and the certainty fields, this is for the individual opportunity. The forecast field contains the value that the sales user expects to get if the deal closes, and then the certainty is to provide a sense of likelihood as to whether the deal will close at some point in the future. Now, at some point in the future, of course, the opportunity does have a target close date, but the pipeline that we see is a total pipeline, not looking at the question of when can we expect certain money to come into the business, within which month and within which quarter. We'll develop that idea of forecasting in a moment. But this value of the forecast and the certainty is something that the user has set. And these field values are typically controlled as part of a workflow. So if I start a workflow, we can see how this is done, just to show that there's a little bit of a control as to how we set the forecast value and the certainty. So I've enabled that. Now I need to just click on one of the workflow actions that will allow me to change the forecast value. And so here I've clicked progress opportunity, and I'm starting to look at this, and you can see that the forecast and the certainty can be entered by the user. Now note that the entry is in one particular currency, which is here the user is entering euros, but we already have discussed how Brian Little, the user, their preference is to have everything displayed in the context of GB pounds. And so we see that the value of the forecast might be changed during workflow. It's shown here, and the value is converted to be displayed according to the user preferences. Now, this is all assuming that the system is configured to enable multi-currency and also has workflow enabled for opportunities. So this could be a simpler experience for the user, but it could also be something that offers less benefit to the business in terms of the richness of the features provided. If we look at the bottom panel within here, we can actually see that quotes and orders exist within the context of an opportunity. Now, we've looked in this series of lessons at how we go ahead and we work with quotes and orders, and we set up price lists, and we've set up currency, and we've done all this to be able to allow our quotes and orders to be entered into the system. And what we see is, with total quote value, is a read-only field. These are all read-only fields, and this is the gross amount of all of the quotes associated with this opportunity, where there's a checkbox in the quote screen, in the summary screen for the quote, saying this should be included in the quotes total. So for every quote to be included, it's totaled up, and then that is added here. But note, though, although that represents the actual value, if you like, of the potential opportunity, that value is not used for forecasting purposes. It is the forecast value that is used. Now, if the quote is set underneath this, is quote set to inactive because of an escalation rule marking it as inactive, then the gross amount is going to be changed, and a quote that is inactive will be deducted from the total quote value. And if a quote is converted to an order, the gross amount of the quote is deducted from the total quote value, and you can see that will affect then the total order value as well. This is another read-only field, and again, it's not used for forecasting purposes. So all of this information tells us what currency we're using and what the total value of the quote is, and whether it is the total value for the order. Now, the total quote value and the forecast value can be synchronized either using automatic or manual ways. So this is one of the things that in a system where you're going to do a lot of forecasting, then you may want to make sure that whatever's in the field for the total quote value or the total order value is automatically pushed into the forecast value to improve the accuracy of the forecast. Now, those forecast values can be synchronized with total quote values using either workflow, that's so as part of a manual stage as you're processing the opportunity, or it can be part of an automatic behavior such as escalation rules, or even as a product of table level scripts. It depends on the process that you're working on. So there are different ways in which you can do that. But probably the easiest way in terms of administration is to go down the workflow route and have that synchronization as part of the process of creating your opportunities, pushing through the opportunities in their process, and controlling the synchronization from the data within the quotes into the value of from the total quote value into the opportunity forecast value. I'm going to return now to the user's list of opportunities. That idea of how you synchronize fields like that from the total quote value or total order value into our forecast value is something that I will cover in workflow. But if we click here, we're showing the screen is got our opportunity statistics. We know about that. This is the forecast values contained within the pipeline, weighted by the certainty assessment that we've given all of these during workflow. This is not, however, sales forecasting. Sales forecasting is a sophisticated way of trying to report the opportunity values in the pipeline against monthly and quarterly targets that are then passed upwards in a reporting hierarchy so that the company can get a true understanding of the likely sales and cash flow value of the entire pipeline across all of the sales team. But what we'll look at in a moment is how sales forecasting allows an individual sales user to flag an opportunity in their pipeline to indicate that it should be included in a sales forecast, and then to be able to enter forecasts from their pipeline as a default starting point, and to then allow managers to be able to take that information to set quotas, to be able to also to be able to revise manually to provide a sense of overwrite so that figures are correct as they're bubbled up to the directors of sales, so you get a proper figure coming out through the company. Now, if I switch over into an administration screen, I've done this. I've switched over into an admin area because what I want to show you is the setup of a user called Brian Little. Now, here in the middle of the screen, you can see that there are a couple of fields: forecasting reports to and forecasting currency. So this is showing us that that Susan May is Brian Little's line manager, so everything will go up to her, and you can have n levels of reporting. So Brian reports to Susan, Susan can report to another manager, and they in turn to another manager, and so on, all the way up to the whoever is the chief executive, or whoever is the ultimate point of contact for all of the sales figures. Now, CRM has any level of hierarchy that you need for this. You'll also see that the currency is set here for reporting in British pounds, and we can understand this, but if I just scroll down a little bit further, we can see that that there's also, I've got to make sure that this user is also configured specifically for sales forecasting. Now, there is a field that you can see there, which is looking at forecast rights. Now, a user can either have no rights at all, so it's the sort of thing that if you're not in the sales team, you're in customer support, then you would have no rights to look at any forecasting. Or you could look at your own forecast, so you'll either have just your own rights, or you would, if you were a manager like Susan May, you may have rights for all users in that territory. So in this particular case, you can see that Brian Little is set up so that he can only see his own forecast, so for this user only. But if I go back to look at this, you can see that I'm back looking at Brian Little's slides, opportunities, and I can see at the top of my screen, you see at the top where it says next to opportunities, which is the tab that we're currently on, it says forecasts. If I click on the forecast tab, it opens up and it displays any of the forecasts that the user has created. Forecasting is on a quarterly basis. It looks at the months within the quarters, depending on your financial year. So Q1, Q2, Q3 of a particular year, and it will be based on a particular start year as well. If I drill down into the existing forecast that's in place, now we will look at building a forecast in another lesson. So the actual process of building a forecast is going to be dealt with when we come on to looking at some of the sales features of Sage CRM. But here you can see that the opportunities included in the pipeline have been grouped by the months in which they're due to close. And then there's also a forecast value of the field, and it has a forecast scenario associated with it, depending on whether the sale is committed, likely, best case, or excluded. And that will then see because these monthly sales are then grouped into quarters, the figures roll up then into the overall chart at the top, where you can see the value of each of those scenarios being displayed. Now, we're going to see in a moment how the system administrator can align a company's financial year, and we'll also be able to understand where the idea of precision comes in when it comes to forecast values, because we probably don't need to have 2 decimal points down to our forecasting when we're dealing with tens of thousands of dollars or pounds. Now I'm just going to click Save and Submit. What that does is it sends it exposes, I should say, this particular forecast to Brian Little's manager, who is Susan May. So I'm just going to click that, and now I can switch over to another user. So I'm going to log on as that user, Susan May. So I'm going to log on as Susan May, and you can see that Susan May has her own sales opportunity pipeline, and therefore she has her own targets as well. If I look at the forecast tab here, you can see that she started to construct a forecast. If I go in to look at that forecast, we can see she's got forecast values of her own sales. But if I scroll down the page, we can see that they also contain figures that have come from her team. Now, we are going to look at this in another lesson. We're going to look at the process of managing forecasts in another lesson. But right now, the experience of Susan May shows that she's looking at not only her forecast, but she's able to look at her subordinates, Brian Little's and others, and we can control settings and we can override things as need be. And there's some control of this by the system administrator. And this is where we can switch back as the system administrator and look at exactly at what configuration is all about. So I'm going to come back down into my data management, come down into the forecast, and then here I see I've got 3 fields. So these 3 fields, they allow us to control within the matrix of those months and quarters. It allows us to control where the financial year starts from. So it's selecting the month that your financial year starts from in this field. So if you start in April, the Q1 would be April, May, June, and Q2 would be July, August, September. And the second choice that we can make is, do you want to allow overwritable forecasts? Now, we saw how forecast values are calculated with the different scenarios, but an overwritable forecast would allow somebody to say, well, no, I don't think it's going to be that much, it's going to be this much, and change it manually. So an overwritable forecast gives the possibility that you can just manually enter the forecast that you're prepared to commit to as a salesperson. And lastly, that forecast precision, which is exactly how precise do you want to be. And within the context of forecasting, you've got this question of, do you want precision or do you want accuracy? And most people will go for accuracy because they want the idea that we are more or less correct in saying that the value that we bring in this month in sales is going to be $30,000, but we don't want it to be $30,000.50 because that doesn't necessarily help us understand where we are in terms of our cash flow. Now we are more or less at the end of our session. So we've looked at the idea of just those 3 fields have quite a big effect on all of that story that we were telling. And of course, it fits in to all of the story that we've been telling when it comes to understanding the fact that the system is multi-currency, the fact that we are using price lists, the fact that we are using quotes and orders, and we are building workflows in and around the opportunity. We're going to take this idea and keep working on the idea of our data in the next lesson. So tomorrow we'll be looking at the idea of mass update. We'll start in the course of next week to develop the ideas around the management of data and adherence to legislation for personal data management. But let's see if anyone's got any questions now. Thank you and goodbye.